last week, we were talking about the importance of meeting together and why that is put into the Bible as something that we should not forsake, we should not quit doing. And that's very interesting that it was put into the Bible in the place that it's put in the Bible, because it was during a time of great persecution. The church that it was written to and the church they were engaging with and talking about was a church that literally was under persecution. People in the church had had their homes taken away because of who they were as Christians. And so in that kind of dangerous circumstance, and that kind of persecution, and that kind of tension, the writer of the Hebrews is saying, don't stop gathering together. Do not forsake that. Do not quit doing that. And he goes on, he tells them about why that is essential, and one of the things he points at is it helps to encourage one another. And so when we miss church, we miss out. When we miss church, we miss out. Because there are blessings to be gathered from being together as a group of like-minded believers. There's blessings to be. And so our meeting together is meant to bless us, but it's also meant to bless others. And so it spills over and becomes so very important. And I had this card that I gave out last week, and if you weren't here, I'd encourage you to pick one up. There's some in the back on the small table. As you leave, pick one up if you don't have one, and it's a quote. And I think it condenses in a really good way the importance of gathering together. It's not something that it should be optional for us. It's something that is integral to our identity. And in the early church, it was groups of houses. Before they ever had any buildings, before it was safe to buy a building and call yourself, a collection of believers, before any was safe, it was homes all over towns and cities. And so that cannot be neglected. And so if you get a chance, pick up one of those cards as you leave today. And we're going to be doing something different for this month. A different kind of focus on things, and it kind of grew out of the poll I took with you all I guess it's been about a month now, maybe a little bit less. And so we're going to be talking about some things different than what we have. And one of the things I want to start with is just kind of a basic question. You'll see where it follows from there. Is if somebody said to you, what's it like living in the South? How would you describe it? Maybe they're from up north, maybe they're from out west, whatever. And they said, what's it like living in the South? Describe it.
Humid.
Might be humid. I think everybody would probably agree with that. What else? What's it like living in the South?
Out of the city, just comfortable, peaceful, easy going.
Okay, you get out of the cities and it's very comfortable and easy going. Okay, good to see that. What else? How would you describe living in the South, being in the South? Might be different from other places.
American by birth, Southern by the grace of God.
The attitude that you're American by birth and Southern by the grace of God. Yeah. What else comes to mind? What's it like living in the South? How would you describe it?
The calmness of the life. We're not always, that some people are, in a jitter all the time. You take life as it comes and appreciate it.
Okay.
Grits.
What's that?
Grits.
And grits. Don't forget the food. Good Southern food. Some grits. Okay. Anything else come to mind?
More people are friendly in the South than they are up north.
Okay. Friendliness. And I've traveled a good bit this past year, and so everywhere from Los Angeles to D.C. and a bunch of places in between, and a lot of things y'all say really is true. There is some uniqueness to the South, whether it be the weather or just kind of openness and friendliness. The whole thing about Southern hospitality, that kind of thing. The more laid back, relaxed kind of life, the more peacefulness, especially you get outside the big cities and stuff and things slow down a little bit for you. That's all true. Have you ever heard the term the Bible Belt?
Mhm.
The Bible Belt. Everybody know that term? Well, it refers to basically those southern states, right? Because in those southern states,
That's everything below the Mason-Dixon line.
yeah, you might look at it below the Mason-Dixon line. It's those southern states below the Mason-Dixon line, and they call that the Bible Belt because, well, there's a church on every corner in the Bible Belt. Things are different in the Bible Belt compared to a lot of other places in the U.S. And you notice that if you travel a little bit. There's churches on every corner. There's a community of faith. People drive around with Christian bumper stickers. You walk around and somebody wears a cross around their neck, and that doesn't surprise you. That just seems almost normal. There's Christian radio stations if you want to listen to Christian music on your car. People wear Christian t-shirts. People talk about going to church. And you got mega churches all over the Bible Belt too. Much different than other parts of the U.S. With all that, if I went around visiting on a Sunday morning, all these churches in the Bible Belt, and I just started to ask, okay, are you a follower of Jesus? Are you a follower of Jesus? I just went from church to church. Big ones, small ones. Are you a follower of Jesus? Now you might say, well, that's silly. That's a silly thing to do. Go around asking that kind of questions in a church on Sunday morning. That's a silly question. That's a waste of time. Well, you might say that's as silly as, going to Athens, maybe someplace fancy like Applebee's, going to Athens and walking inside and going, anybody here like the dogs? Anybody here like the Bulldogs? Well, of course, right? Everybody's going to say go Dogs. That seems like a silly question to ask on a church if you're a follower of Jesus. But the reality is, there's fans and then there's followers. And what we have in the Bible Belt is something that's been coined, and it's a useful phrase. It's called cultural Christianity. If you don't know that, cultural Christianity, it means basically there is influence, Christian influence from churches and whatnot in the South. Cultural influence. But there's a big difference between cultural influence and actually being a Christian. Actually being a follower of Christ. Billy Graham, years back, a good 20, 25 years ago, Billy Graham, who's from the Bible Belt, he's from North Carolina, been all over the globe, right? He's been in churches all over the globe. And they asked him, Billy, or Dr. Graham, what do you think about the people in church as far as, being a Christian or not, and how, that actually works out, and what's the makeup? And this is a man who's been all over the globe, been in churches on every continent, basically, for decades. And he said, 1 out of 10 is what I would think. 1 out of 10 people in church on a Sunday are Christians. They're followers. Now think about that. 1 out of 10. Let's just say Billy's right. Let's just say Billy actually, has some insight on this. His observations after decades and decades of knowing people all over the globe in churches. He said, I would think 1 out of 10. You go to a mega church in Atlanta, 1,000 people. 1,000. The whole auditorium's stuffed with people. Only 100 are actually Christians. That could be the case. You go to a small church, maybe 100 people. You only have 10 real Christians. That's like the deacon board, the pastor, and a couple others, right? That's it. If you want to, break it down like that. And that may be shocking to you, and you may think, well, I couldn't agree with that. I don't think that's right. That may shock you a little bit, but here's the thing. When Jesus was giving his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 and 6, 7, when he was going through it, when he gets right to the end after teaching all this stuff, when he gets right towards the end, He said, there will be some on that last day who will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all these things in your name? I mean, we were participating in church things. We were participating in Christian things. We were even leading Christian things. And he says, I tell you the truth, I never knew you. They were self-deceived. He never knew them. See, they were fans, and there's a lot of that would fall into that category. And then there's followers. We may get excited about something. We may admire something. We may be fans of it. But it's a whole lot of difference between being a fan and being a follower. And that's where our series is going this month. Fan or follower. Clean that up. And I say this to hold up a mirror, not a pair of binoculars for you to look at other people. Although we will discuss that. But the primary focus is to hold up a mirror, because you do not want to be self-deceived. Because just because you're a member of a church, just because you've read a Bible, just because you've gone to VBS, just because you've done this or that, does not make you a follower of Jesus. There are telltale signs which will point us to that. Whether you're just a fan, I kind of like church people, They're nice to me. They talk nice to me. They feed me well. But I'm not really a follower, and you can tell. There's some telltale things. In fact, where we're going to start this morning, our focus we're going to call the eye test. This is probably going to be the simplest one we're going to go to, called the eye test. Because some people, especially in the Bible Belt, more so than probably anywhere else in the United States, people are part of cultural Christianity, and they're fans, but they're not followers. And some may be self-deceived because they grew up in it. Their mom and dad might have been that way. And they've been to church so much, they can't even tell you how many times. But they're not a follower. And so they may be self-deceived, or they may really know that what the reality is. They're just pretending. They're just pretending. So that could be your case. So whatever it may be, that's where we're going to start with the eye test this morning. And I'm not going to bounce you around all over the Bible. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on one book of the Bible. Because what this book does is it points to different parts to show in a clarifying way who's a fan, who's a follower. And so for the month of October, if you're not currently reading something, you're not, on a program or whatever it might be, not something structured, go with us and read through the book of 1 John. That's where we're going to get all our answers to these questions and looking into this idea of fan or follower. The book of 1 John. And it's a small one. Might take you a minute to find it in your Bibles or screens if you pull it up on a tablet or something. But 1 John is where we're going to get all our information. So it should be real easy to track with this. Now, 1 John was written by who? Somebody say John. Anybody got any other ideas? You'd be correct. 1 John is written by John. John the Apostle. John the disciple of Jesus. One of those three that was basically closest to him. They kind of got the bulk, the focused teaching time a lot of times with Jesus as you see, him doing things. And so 1 John is a letter, and it's not specifically to one church. And so what happens is, this was something that he wrote that he wanted the churches to basically distribute. So it's not like, Paul writing to the church at Corinth, or Paul writing to the church at Thessalonica, or Paul writing to the church at Rome. It's not like a specific church group that is being addressed in 1 John. It's something he's basically making sure circulates. Because, as it's applicable to all the churches, to understand fan or follower. That's important for all the churches to understand. Because they need to have clarity about this. So John writes this letter. John wrote 5 parts of our New Testament. You know what those 5 are?
Revelation, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and John.
And the Gospel of John, right. So he's got 5 parts in the New Testament. So he's writing a big bulk for us in the New Testament. 1 John. So you have 1 John. We're going to start near the beginning, right, chapter 1. And as he begins to introduce things as himself at the beginning of 1 John, how he writes about it is basically he starts talking about Jesus from like the first lines. And he starts talking about his relationship with Jesus, that he knew Jesus, he ate with Jesus, he saw Jesus, he touched Jesus, all these, there were some ideas when people started hearing about Jesus, they said, well, this guy, he must have been one of the gods, because, they believed in a God for everything back then. And he said, well, he must have been one of the gods, but, if he's one of the gods, he wouldn't be hanging out eating with other people. They wouldn't be able to touch him and know that he's real, that kind of thing. And so he emphasizes that at the very beginning. We saw him, we were with him, we touched him, we heard him. He was just kind of emphasizing that. And then he talks about the reason for his writing is that you will have fellowship with us. That you will be a follower and not just a fan. So if you're reading this and you're just a fan of Jesus, maybe you have been invited to one of these house churches and you got to know the families and they're all nice to you and you think this is a great place to be and they're much better than, other people and maybe the food's great, and maybe they're taking care of you, maybe you're on hard times and they're helping you, and so you like the community, you like the groups. But read John's letter, and then you will know, okay, where am I at though, really? I can blend in with them, but where am I at really? Am I saved? Am I a Christian? Am I a follower? Or do I just like the group? Am I just a fan? Maybe I've read some things about Jesus or been taught some things about Jesus, and I think, wow, I agree with that. Love thy neighbor. That's great. And so you become a fan and not a follower. So he starts off in 1 John 1, introducing himself, talking about why he wrote it, so they would share in the fellowship that he has. And then in verse 5, he says something really interesting. And I bring this up because it's something we need to hold on to. Writing in verse 5, it says, "This is the message we've heard from him," talking about Jesus, "and declared to you. God is light. In him there is no darkness at all." God is light. That means perfection. That means holiness. That means without flaw, without sin. God is light. And in him there is no darkness. Now here's the thing. Why does he put that? That's a theological understanding. Why does he put that right at the beginning before he starts telling you how to tell the difference between whether you're a fan or follower? Why does he add it there? Well, it's very key. He puts it in there because you're not going to get anywhere with God if you think you're as good as God. You're not going to get anywhere with God if you question His character. If you think you're just as good as God. And so that's why He raises up our understanding, and that's where He puts the focus. He says, God is light. He's perfect. He's holy. He's good. See, that's what He's talking about when He says God is light. God is light, and in Him there is no darkness. That's God's character. That's echoes from Eden. Remember, that was the attack early on. You can't trust God. Eve and Adam. You can't trust Him. He's holding out on you. That was the temptation very, very early on at the beginning. You can't trust God's character. You can't trust Him. And if you don't trust somebody, how hard is it to listen to them when they tell you something to do? When they tell you to risk something? If you don't trust somebody's character, how do you love them? If you don't trust somebody's character, how do you submit to them and do what they say? Well, you don't. You don't trust them. They may be leading you astray. They may be lying to you. They may be pulling the wool over your eyes. You don't trust them. You're not going to do what they say. And so right from the beginning, He makes sure, okay, you need to understand this. God is light. In Him there is no darkness. You can trust Him. And you will not get anywhere with your relationship with God if you don't understand that. You will not get anywhere in your relationship with God if you don't understand that. Because then you'll start second guessing. But here's what you need to understand. God is more merciful than you. God is kinder than you. God is more patient than you. God is more loving than you. All these things that we may be critical about God and ask questions and everything, we need to keep in the back of our minds. He is perfect. And He's far beyond us in goodness. In His wrath, He always remembers mercy. That means when God is angry about something, He always remembers mercy. We don't. Because we're not perfect. So He throws this right out at the beginning. And this idea of light and goodness. And that's central. Because you're not going to get anywhere in your relationship with God if you don't see Him that way. Because you won't trust Him. And then in verse 6, it says, if we claim to have fellowship with Him, so if we claim to follow God, have fellowship with Him, yet we walk in darkness. So we claim to have fellowship with Him. We claim to be following God. And yet we walk in darkness. Now, walk is just a very familiar biblical phrase talking about how you live your life. That's how it's used. How you live your life. That's your walk. What's your pattern of life? What's your normal life? How do you live your life? That's your walk. And he says, look, if you claim to have fellowship with God, you claim to be a true follower, and yet you walk in darkness. It says, we lie and do not live in the truth. We lie if we make that statement. Because darkness, and the way to think about darkness is that it's a broad term. The way it's used. And it means basic morality. It's not something you have to go to a Bible study to understand or know. It's talking about basic morality. The basics of morality. The things that your conscience, when you do it wrong, is sitting there going, You don't lie. You don't cheat. You don't steal. You don't let self-centeredness and pride run your life. You're not violent. You're not greedy and taking from people. This basic morality. You don't need to go to a Bible study or a church to know this. This is the basics. And he said, look, if your pattern of life is filled with this, you lie to say that you're following God. There's a certain level of basic morality that you should see in everybody who says they're following God. That they say they're a Christian. And if it's not there, then they're not. Because you don't get good fruit from a bad tree. You get bad fruit from a bad tree. And so he's basically putting this down to kind of the lowest rung on things. He's just saying there's a basic morality. That you don't walk in darkness. Your pattern of life does not have this in it. There's a certain basic morality that all Christians would have. Now, you may know somebody. This may be something you're familiar with. If you ever come across somebody who's a new Christian, right? A very immature Christian. And you go, their life is a mess. In fact, I would definitely say that they're struggling here. That's true. You will see oftentimes new Christians, they're still struggling with basic morality because God has brought them out of the pit. I mean, I've known people that have been in jail, have had, tremendous records of crime and just awful things. And so the day they became a Christian, or the week they became a Christian, they're still struggling with how God's forming their character. But here's the thing. There's a difference. Whether you're fighting your sin or you're friendly with it. There's a difference when you're fighting your sin or you're friendly with it. If I'm fighting my sin, I'm trying to get away from it. I don't want no part of it. I'm going to try and get people to help me. I'm going to get around people who are going to help me conquer it. I'm going to be praying. I'm going to be doing all these other things. I don't want this to be what my character is. And God is going to empower that and motivate you because you are a real follower. And so you're fighting this sin. But you know what I know? There are people who call themselves Christians who are quite friendly with their sin. And they're living with it. That's their walk. And it's darkness. That's their walk. And it's darkness. And what we do sometimes is that maybe because they're close to us in some way, and we just have so much affection for them, or love, and we wish things were different. And here's what we do. We go, well, okay, this may be true, but they just don't know. It's just not working out for them. I really want to believe that they're a follower, but you're just pretending that they are, when they're really not. A pastor was telling me a story about, he's a grandfather in the story, and in the story, I think it was his grandson came into the room, and the mom was there, and he's throwing a fit about something, and he's stomping his feet, and he's mad, and he's yelling, and he wants this, and she's not going to give it to him. He's all throwing a fit at his mom, and he's in tears, and she says, I want you to go stand in that corner with your nose in the corner until you calm down and apologize to me. Well, he's all tore up, and he's going into that corner, and he's just yelling and crying and everything. And he's just in that corner for, it seems like, ages. And the parents start to think, well, he's had a long day. It's been a tough day for him. He got to get up early, he didn't get his nap. maybe it's been long enough. Maybe we'll just let him out of the corner. And right after they started whispering that, a couple minutes later, as they watched him throw this fit in that corner, just covered in tears and yelling, his cousin started banging on the piano in the next room, playing. And that little boy loved the piano. He wanted to go play too. So he turns around, runs to his mom, gives her a hug, says, "I'm sorry, Mom, I won't do it again." Runs out of the room. He knew. He knew. And even though he was yelling and crying and going through all this stuff and stomping his feet in that corner, and they just thought, "Oh, poor boy." He knew what he was doing. Because once he heard that piano and thought, "I should be playing that piano too." I'm sorry, Mama. There's people in our lives that we kind of put in that category. Well, they had a hard time. Maybe their parents didn't treat them well. Maybe they grew up this way. Maybe stuff like that. And they're awful. And we still want to think of them as followers. When we should be praying for them. That God would get their attention because they're this and not this. They need to be saved by His grace. His kingdom is a kingdom of light. It's not a kingdom filled with violence and lies and betrayals and greed. They're not fighting it. They're friendly with it. And so the big question it all boils down to is, are you walking in darkness? I said, the message should come as a mirror before you start putting on your binoculars. But you need to understand and think clearly when you do look at those people that we're talking about, your friend circle, family, however it might be. You need to think clearly because you should be praying for their salvation if they're walking in darkness. Instead of just assuming because it makes you feel good and helps you sleep better at night, to think, well, at least they're saved. When really, the whole pattern is one of not fighting, but being friendly with that sin they have. That basic morality that you know everybody knows, that your conscience will speak to you about. As the music plays, that's what I want to put on your heart this morning. Like I said, it comes as a mirror first. So if there's something in your life you need to deal with, then deal with it. And if there's somebody close to you that kind of fits this description, then you need to pray for them in the right way. Because God will change lives. God will change lives.